In this presentation, I'm going to continue our discussion of Gerd Gigerenzer's book, Risk Savvy, How to Make Good Decisions. The big idea for today's presentation is going to be distinguishing the categories of certainty, risk, and uncertainty, and some problems that arise when we think of risky situations as being more certain than they are, and when we think of uncertain situations as, in fact, being risk situations. So, Gigerenzer is going to define the terms risk and uncertainty in a very specific way, such that they turn out differently, even though on perhaps more common ways of using those words, they turn out to be much the same. So that's going to be the big topic for today. Before I get into that, I want to review just a little bit some of the big picture ideas about Gigerenzer. So we've seen in previous class periods that some theorists, Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, and their students and collaborators, take a pretty negative or pessimistic view of human cognition. This quotation that you see on this page is from Gigerenzer. Anytime you see a quotation and then a number in parentheses out to the right, like you see here, the number 2, this refers to a page number in Gigerenzer's book. If there's another book that I cite in this presentation, and I do cite some passages from a book by Daniel Kahneman, I put Kahneman's name or the other author's name there in parentheses. But if you just see a parentheses, it's Gigerenzer. So this particular view represented in this quotation, that evolution seems to have cheated us by giving us shabby mental software. And this represents the view of the pessimists. And Gigerenzer wants us to know that he takes a different perspective, that he doesn't think that Kahneman and Tversky have shown that people are stupid. And he doesn't think that Kahneman and Tversky have shown that people are doomed to be stupid because of their innate cognitive equipment, their innate neurological tools, the cognitive tools that they're born with. He thinks much of this can be shaped, has been shaped by our current educational system, and can be shaped in new and improved ways by a better educational system, one that brings risk literacy, risk savviness into the center. He suggests that we teach our children throughout many years of schooling the mathematics of certainty using algebra, geometry, calculus, basically all the math, most all the math you've ever seen. But that we don't teach students the mathematics of uncertainty and risk using probabilistic statistical thinking and decision theory, and that this is a problem. Similarly, we don't teach students the psychology that stands behind many of the decisions and desires, emotions and cognitions that they experience. So he thinks psychology and statistics are going to be absolutely key to making a better society. Last week we talked about a few key questions that Gigerenzer thinks we always need to ask when faced with probabilistic or statistical information. And one of the questions is percent of what? Someone gives you a percentage. Oftentimes journalists will just give you a percentage and not tell you what it's the percentage of, or give you any sort of background of comparison, and they will pretend like they've given you all the information you need to know, and a lot of people don't take the time to realize what it is that they fail to understand, the degree to which they fail to understand what's really being said. An example that Gigerenzer uses that we did not talk about in class last time, but he talks about for several pages in his book, is this. When a meteorologist says there's a 50% chance of rain tomorrow, this phrase is thrown around so much, 70%, 30% chance of rain. And you'll basically never hear a meteorologist pause to tell you what it means, 50% of what, or how you should understand the relevant reference class. So Gigerenzer did a survey in several locations to try to figure out what people of various walks of life or various locations think that this phrase means. So in Germany, some residents of Berlin thought that it meant If a meteorologist says there's a 50% chance of rain tomorrow, then we can be certain that it will rain 50% of the day tomorrow. So the 50% applies to time or duration of rain. It's a temporal factor, but it doesn't apply to how certain the meteorologist is. The meteorologist is 100% certain that there's a 50% of the temporal duration of the day there will be rain. That's a mistake. Some other people surveyed thought that it meant that it will rain in 50% of the region covered by the prediction. Again, there's an implied certainty on behalf or on the part of the meteorologist. They're 100% certain that in 50% of the spatial extent of the region covered by the prediction there will be rain. But the correct way to interpret it was found amongst some New Yorkers, where the 50% applies to the confidence that we can have in there being rain at all. So it will rain on 50% of the days for which the prediction is made, 50% of the time, in the weather, when we experience weather conditions of the sort that we are going to experience tomorrow, we will see rain. So that's the correct view. Also, Gigerenzer throws in the fact that rain should be understood as any amount of precipitation above 0.01 inches. So Gigerenzer thinks it's a problem that people have mistaken conceptions of what 50% chance of rain means, or 50% chance of, all sorts of things means. One issue that I have with Gigerenzer's discussion of this example, which I believe occurs in chapter 1 of the book, is that once he's put the last two lines that you see on your screen there together, he sort of acts like everything has been fully explained. The meaning of a meteorological prediction has been explained. Once you understand that rain, the 50% chance applies to a frequency. It's a frequency statistic. On 50% of the days for which the prediction is made, there will be rain, where this is understood as precipitation greater than or equal to, or I guess just greater than 0.01 inches. These two facts together do not clear up everything for me. For example, the big question for me is what percentage of the geographic area covered by the prediction must receive that 0.01 inches. So suppose that today the meteorologist says there's a 50% chance of rain tomorrow, and then tomorrow there is just above 0.01 inches of rain in 0.0002% of the geographic area covered by the prediction. Does that mean that we should count this day with that much precipitation in that restricted of an area as one of the days on which there was in fact rain? I don't think so. I mean, if the rain is only going to occur in that small percentage of the geographic area, that seems to me to count as not rain, because it's not rain on the whole. All I'm doing here is just doing more of what Gigerenzer advises. Don't take sort of percentages at face value unless you really know what's behind them. And so I think even Gigerenzer is not giving me everything. I want to know not just how much rain, but in what geographic area. In any case, this little exercise where Gigerenzer criticizes some people and then I criticize Gigerenzer is supposed to show that it's just supposed to illustrate the importance of the point that he begins his book with. Always ask percentage of what when someone gives you a percentage, and make sure you understand the relevant aspects of the reference class. Another example that he uses, this occurs in chapter 5, concerns an Austrian pension plan. So there was this new pension plan. I think it was begun in 2004. People put aside a certain amount of money per month and per year in this government-backed plan. And it was a collaboration between banks and the government. And there was this 9% figure that was thrown around. Now what the truth was is that if you put in a certain amount, then when you're ready to retire, the government will give you back the amount that you put in, plus 9% of whatever you put in. You put in $100,000, then you get that $100,000 back, plus 9% of $100,000 when you retire. But a lot of people weren't sure what the 9% meant. A lot of banks and employees of banks, in their advertising campaigns and in their discussions with customers, suggested perhaps this was a 9% annual percentage rate. In other words, you would earn that 9% kind of over and over again each year. That's different than just earning it once. In any case, it turns out that many bank employees didn't have any idea whether this was an annual percentage rate, whether this was a one-time payment from the government. By the way, he does note that if the government does just pay you 9% of everything you put in, then if you've paid in for, like, say, 30 years or so, this 9% payment works out to less than a 1% annual percentage rate. Anyway, these are just very different things. I had a similar experience with something like this this summer. In August, I took out a loan from Key Bank, one of our area banks, and the person told me the rate, which seemed to be a percentage. Well, it was a percentage rate of some kind, the percentage that it would charge me. And I just had a simple question: how often is this percentage rate calculated? So I took the total percentage of the loan that I was considering. I think it may have been a $5,000 loan at the time. I can't actually recall. And I looked at, well, are you going to calculate this percent once a year, and I just pay that one amount? Because if so, that's not very much. The percentage they gave me was so low, and I look at what I would have to pay for having a $5,000 loan for 1 year, and it takes me a whole year to pay off, or I don't even pay it off at all till 12 months later, at which time I pay it off in full. I would only pay this percentage. It seemed too small. And then I asked him, and then I calculated how much it would be to calculate that same percentage rate each month. Like, do I get charged that amount? Take my $5,000, multiply it by the percentage rate. A certain amount results from the product. Do I pay that every month? That figure was way too high. The calculated once a year figure was too low. And I asked my bank, the person in charge of my checking account, what the deal was, and she had no idea, and she called over her manager, and they had no idea. And when they plugged the numbers into their computer, it wound up being somewhere, they had no idea. Okay, so in any case, the point is, you should always ask percentage of what, and if you don't understand and the bank doesn't understand, and, well, proceed with confidence, or maybe don't proceed at all. Another issue we talked about last week is as compared to what? Someone gives you a percentage, and you should ask the question, okay, that's a nice percentage, but what's the background rate? What's the base rate? I gave the example last time of people who are depressed, clinically depressed, who go and see a Freudian psychotherapist. After 6 months' time, 75% of them are cured of depression. They're no longer depressed. But then I also gave you the background or base rate, which showed that of people who are clinically depressed, who do absolutely nothing, they don't receive help of any kind, no medication, no counseling, no support group, nothing. After 6 months' time, 75% of them are no longer depressed either, which suggests that Freudian psychotherapy is as good as nothing, quite literally. Okay, so that was a key question we had to ask. And then, as we saw, of course, last time, we spent a lot of time discussing what's the absolute risk increased. If a risk is increased 100%, that still may be pretty insignificant if the risk increase has only gone from 1 in 7,000 to 2 in 7,000, as was the case for risk of thrombosis for women in the UK taking a certain contraceptive pill. Last time we also talked about issues from Chapter 4 of Gigerenzer's book on fear of risks. On your screen from page 11 is a term which we didn't define in class, but we kind of talked about, we talked about the idea, but without explicitly defining it, I think. This definition occurs in Chapter 1, but fear of these kinds of risks is talked about primarily in Chapter 4. And these are called dread risks, low probability events in which many people are killed suddenly. And we have this big fear of these kinds of risks. So our innate fear responses tell us to fear things like a rare nuclear power plant disaster that kills lots of people all at once. But our innate fear responses don't tell us to fear a steady and regular death toll from pollution from coal-burning power plants. These are two of Gigerenzer's examples. So even if more people are killed by things in the second scenario, they're not killed all at once. The deaths are spread out, one at a time, two at a time. They're spread out temporally and spatially. One person over here, one person over there. That sort of doesn't get us excited. The things that get our fear responses really excited are where it's a lot of people all at once. And as we talked about last time, we often wind up fearing perhaps the wrong things because of this. So we also talked about last time how fear of dread risks comes from, it's rooted in our evolutionary past, and Gigerenzer therefore calls this an old brain kind of fear, a fear that's not always in line with what should be most feared in the modern world. He also notes something I didn't mention last time, but this is such a striking fact it's worth highlighting, that far more people are afraid of air travel than there are people afraid of driving in a car for a 12-mile trip. But if you look at the actual risk of death statistics, one non-stop flight within the continental United States, the risk of death there is the same risk involved in one 12-mile drive. As he says at one point, if you arrive in your car at the airport safely, the riskiest part of your trip is over. Okay, so those are some of the things that we've talked about before. Excuse me. I now want to go on to talk about issues from Chapter 2, 5, and 7 concerning certainty, risk, and uncertainty. As you can see, Chapter 2 is called Certainty is an Illusion. And Gigerenzer begins with the following reflections that I want you to think about. He says, if we knew everything about the future with certainty, our lives would be drained of emotion. No surprise and pleasure. No thrill, no joy or thrill. We knew it all along. The first kiss, the first proposal, the birth of a healthy child would be about as exciting as last year's weather report. If our world ever turned certain, life would be mind-numbingly dull. So I don't believe this is true for a minute. I think most humans are probably going to agree with Gigerenzer, and not with me, though. I'm considering asking you an exam question about this to try to think of ways that this could be criticized. I don't think this. I think first kiss, first proposal. I think can be just as exciting and meaningful, even without uncertainty. But in any case, the main point that Gigerenzer wants to start off with, this is the first page of Chapter 2, is just emphasizing that knowing about the future with certainty, that's not our way. However, there are people in our world that are manufacturers of certainty. He singles out bankers, by which he doesn't mean so much the person, the teller at the bank who takes your check and deposits it and cashes your check or whatever. More like investment advisors, investment bankers, and other people like physicians, politicians. He also discusses how these people who promise certainty because of their expertise in wonderful insight into the nature of things, including the future, that these people try to alleviate some of our fears, and we treat them in certain ways that we shouldn't treat them because of the fears we have, and because of a felt need for certainty that we have. So there's this problem that we sort of we don't like the fact that there is uncertainty, and we want people to tell us that things, not just that things are going to be okay, but that things are going to be more certain than they really are. And he calls this desire for certainty the biggest obstacle to becoming risk savvy. So this desire or quest for certainty is called by psychologists, well, one measure of it is called need for cognitive closure. This is a personality trait that can be measured by questionnaires. There are the personality traits that go to make up uneasiness with uncertainty, but this is a central one. Need for cognitive closure. So what I wanted to do is present to you some of the features of the need for cognitive closure, and including, I wanted to show you some of the bits on the questionnaire that psychologists use when they present these questionnaires to people and try to figure out how much of this need they have. This doesn't appear in the text of Gigerenzer's book, but I want to flesh out more of the kind of mentality that he has in mind that he thinks is a problem for living in our world, which is marked by uncertainty. First, a few general remarks about the need for cognitive closure. People who are high on this need, people come in, by the way, there's a spectrum. It's not like you either have this need or you don't, or you're either high or low. There's this spectrum with all sorts of gradations in between. But people who tend to be high in this need, they score high on this test, they're more prone to stereotypical thinking, more prone to what we think of as black and white thinking. It's either got to be this way or it's got to be this other way. This means they're going to be more uncomfortable with probability and statistics because, of course, probability doesn't say it's this way or this other way. Probability is all about degrees, continuous values between 0 and 1, allowing for lots of things in between the black and white of the 0 and 1. So people who are high on need for cognitive closure, they're more prone to stereotypical thinking, black and white thinking, and they remember less information that contradicts their stereotypes. It just simply fails to get absorbed. I find ambiguity confusing. These people don't like philosophy classes, in other words. Gigerenzer says this: small children often need security blankets to soothe their fears. And he compares people who are high on need for cognitive closure as being like a child that's never let go of a security blanket. For the mature adult, a high need for certainty can be a dangerous thing. You got to grow up and realize we live in an uncertain world. So here's a bit of the questionnaire that's used in measuring need for cognitive closure. It begins by saying, read each of the following statements and decide how much you agree with them according to your beliefs, experiences, and please use the following scale. 1 for strongly disagree, all the way up to 6 for strongly agree. So here's some of the items. I think that having clear rules and order at work is essential for success. Even after I've made up my mind about something, I'm always eager to consider a different option. By the way, every time you see an asterisk by a question number, that means that the psychologist administering this test is going to reverse score this item. In other words, strongly agreeing with question number 2 is going to be equivalent to strongly disagreeing with question number 1, and vice versa. So take question number 1. Someone who is high in need for cognitive closure is going to agree that having clear rules and order is important. They're going to agree with 1, but they're going to be less inclined to agree with 2. They're going to be inclined to disagree. that can be inclined to disagree that after you've made up your mind, reconsidering might be a good thing. No, they just want an answer. They just want an answer. They're less concerned with that answer being the correct answer than they are with just having an answer. Just having an answer makes them feel like they have a security blanket. Okay, so some items are reverse scored. Here's another one. I don't like situations that are uncertain. I dislike questions that can be answered in more than one way. I like to have friends who are unpredictable. I find that a well-ordered life with regular hours suits my temperament. I enjoy the uncertainty of going into a new situation without knowing what might happen. So again, a reverse scored item. A person high on this need is not going to enjoy going into the new and the unknown. When dining out, I like to go places where I've been before so that I know what to expect. And I'm going to order the same dish I've always ordered the last 15 years. And I'm not going to go... I'm sure I'm not going to eat sushi. I'm not going to dine in any of the new and interesting ethnic restaurants that are continually opening up in the city of Buffalo every month. No way. So I think you get the idea. I understand. I feel uncomfortable when I don't understand the reason why an event occurred in my life. I just need a reason. It doesn't need to be the correct reason, or even a very good reason, or a reason for which I have very much evidence. I just need a reason. The way that a child needs a security blanket. Without a reason, I feel scared. Scared of the dark, unknown. I feel irritated when a person disagrees with the group. Don't like to change my plans. Would definitely not describe myself as indecisive if I were high in need for cognitive. So the subtraits comprising need for cognitive closure include things like, as you've seen, a need for order, a need for predictability, a need for decisiveness, low tolerance of ambiguity, and just general closed-mindedness. Okay, so Gigerenzer and some of his studies, and the studies of other psychologists, have shown that people who are high in need for cognitive closure are uncomfortable with uncertainty, and that in general, people have some uncomfortableness, some unease that they feel with uncertainty. So we're all sort of like this to some degree is the idea. Gigerenzer, though, thinks that whatever degree we sort of innately or defaultly are when it comes to a need for cognitive closure, unease with uncertainty, that we can, unease with uncertainty. He thinks that we can get better by training ourselves, by learning, by changing societal structures so that we're more open about the risks that there are. So don't be like the person who's high in need for cognitive closure. So, in order to introduce his distinction between uncertainty and risk, he mentions this sort of famous little speech from Donald Rumsfeld when he was Secretary of Defense in the George W. Bush administration. If you haven't seen it before, go ahead and pause my presentation and listen to it, or even if you have seen it but you haven't seen it in a while, go ahead and good to remind yourself of what exactly it was that he said. I have the YouTube link there on this in this slide. Rumsfeld was ridiculed in a big way for what he said, and he deserved to be ridiculed because he's in one sense, because he's asked a question about the justifications that he, Cheney, Colin Powell, and Bush all gave for why we invaded Iraq. We were attacked on 9/11, so we felt this need to respond, so we attack Iraq. Well, on September 11th, 2001, we were attacked by some guys from Saudi Arabia who were part of a terrorist organization that operated in Afghanistan. and to an extent Pakistan, certainly later in Pakistan, but at that time Afghanistan in particular. So we have Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia implicated, but we're invading Iraq as a response. And a journalist asked Donald Rumsfeld, what's up with that? And he winds up saying, well, there are the known knowns, and there are the known unknowns, and then there are the unknown unknowns. And the journalist says, what are you talking about? And people laughed at him because he's avoiding the question. He's trying to find something to talk about. Instead of talking about the fact that, yes, we invaded one country on a certain pretext, which, regardless of political party, regardless of what you think about politics, you have to admit was, it was questionable. Well, we were not invaded by Iraqis on September 11th, 2001. Okay, so on the one hand, there's the fact that Rumsfeld deserved to be ridiculed for avoiding an exceedingly important question. But then there's the other part of the story, and that is, first of all, it really is true that there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And Gigerenzer wants to use this division of issues to sort of characterize certainty, risk, and uncertainty. Okay, known knowns, that's the things we know we know. Known unknowns, those are the things that we know we don't know. The unknown unknowns are the things we don't know we don't know. These three categories correspond to certainty, risk, and a recent, just as a side note, a recent documentary on Rumsfeld was released just within this past year called The Unknown Known, a film by Errol Morris, one of our most important documentary filmmakers around today. I'm hoping to watch this movie next week during Thanksgiving break. But here's Gigerenzer's category. So this is a chart taken from Chapter 2. So there's certainty. There's the things we're certain about in life. Okay. There are other categories. Categories of risk, for example. The categories of uncertainty. Gigerenzer doesn't take the time to explain the following fact, but each of the three categories that he's going to list here, they're going to be represented by a circle, and the circle gets larger each time. Gigerenzer does not comment on that. So you'll notice that the realm of certainty is smaller than the realm of risk. The circle is smaller. And that's key. The realm of things that we're really certain about. Okay. When it comes to lots of everyday life decisions, that certainty doesn't characterize much of it. What Gigerenzer calls risk, for short, is really what he is a category that he also characterizes as the known risks. So there's some element of chance. There's a probabilistic element, but when you're dealing with things that Gigerenzer places in this category, the chances, the risks, the probabilities, they're well understood. So you'll see there in the circle, he's got games of chance, casinos, slot machines, lotteries. In each of these cases, there's a chance of winning and a chance of losing. And we know what that chance is. The chances are well understood, known risks. There's a few more cases that fall under this broad category that you see there at the bottom. Weather predictions, most of the time, batting averages, risks of many diseases, most causes of death, and life expectancy. These are areas of life where we just have lots and lots and lots of data. So if we have an individual, he's a 45-year-old male. If we know his age, 45, we know that he's a male, we know his ethnicity, Caucasian or African American. We know whether he smokes or doesn't smoke. We know how much alcohol he drinks or doesn't drink. We know whether he has a diet that's high in fat, low in fat, high in protein, high in carbs. high in cholesterol? What kind of work does this person do? Blue collar, white collar, socioeconomic status. I mean, we have just tons and tons of stats on how likely you are to die, how much longer you're likely to live, given what category you fall into. We just have lots of... Now, of course, these statistics concern large classes of people. So out of all the white, male, high socioeconomic status, non-smoker, regular drinkers, we can say how likely they are to live 35 more years. But obviously we can't say of one, it's very difficult to say of one individual, okay, this guy, Joe Smith, right here, this one guy who belongs to that broad category, tell me when he's going to die. Well, we can't do that. But we shouldn't underestimate the degree to which we know stuff. I mean, we can pretty well tell of all the guys who fit the description I gave a moment ago, we pretty well know when, on average, guys in that group are going to kick the bucket. We may not be able to predict death for any particular one of them, but when we group them all together, we can be pretty accurate. So that's the category of risk. So Gigerenzer also wants to stake out another category, the area of uncertainty. Too much of the time he thinks people contrast only the first category with the second and sort of act like those two categories exhaust all the categories there are. Not only is there this third category, but you'll notice that the circle in the third category of uncertainty is larger than the circle in the other two, and also the colors are darker. Again, that's something he doesn't comment on anywhere in the text. He doesn't comment on the size of the circles or the colors, but I assume the darkness of the uncertainty is supposed to indicate something about the dimness of our knowledge, and also the potential hazards that come with that. I mean, we associate brightness with happiness and darkness with dread and fear. So, in any case, much of life is lived in this third category. He puts stocks, romance, earthquake, business, and health in there. He has a chapter on romance, which we'll talk about next week. That's chapter 8. We've already talked some about health, and we'll talk more about health next week as well when we cover chapter 9. So next week, by the way, when I mean next week, I mean the Thursday after Thanksgiving. We will cover chapters 8 and 9. And a few other bits. But in this area, the risks are unknown. These are the unknown unknowns. There's risks here, but unlike in games of chance, we don't have a good handle on things. Unlike cases where we have decades after decades after decades of stats about causes of death and life expectancy, there's some things over here we're just sort of wildly about. Now, I should mention before going on that with some issues I'm not entirely clear whether Gigerenzer thinks they should go in the risk category or the uncertain category. So you'll notice the bottom item there in the uncertain category is health. But you'll notice too that in a previous slide under risk, the middle category, I put things about health, life expectancy, causes of death, facts about certain kinds of diseases. So there are some things pertaining to our medical health that may go in the risks category some of the time and maybe in the uncertain category some of the time. And it's not always completely clear to me even when Gigerenzer thinks which issue should go in which category sometimes. Okay. But when it comes to the middle category of risk, the central, prototypical risk categories are very well-defined situations of games of chance. There's much more that belongs in this middle category. Remember, I threw in a bunch of other things besides just slot machines and blackjack and roulette, dice games. But games of chance are sort of the central paradigmatic case. And then anytime you're dealing with an actual game of chance or with some area of life that is approximated pretty well by the mathematics that we apply to games of chance, then this is where logic and statistical thinking function very well. We understand what the risks are. These are the known unknowns, or more straightforwardly, the known risks. But as we're going to talk about today and to our last lecture, the last week of class, there's a whole lot of things that fall in this last category where relying upon the same mathematical tools that are appropriate for the middle category, when you're really in the third category on the right, can be quite disastrous. So there's two kinds of illusions that Gigerenzer talks about, and again, these illusions are spread about through chapters 2, 5, and 7 mostly. That's why I've grouped them together because of their thematic commonalities. But one illusion is this. He calls it the zero risk illusion. This is where we have these very nice mathematical tools for handling the known risks of the middle category. But the illusion arises when we get so comfortable with these known risks that we start to convince ourselves or start acting like there's no risk at all, that we're in a situation where there's certainty. And that's a problem. Here's one example. Gigerenzer gives this example from, I believe this was on a billboard, but in any case, it was an official notice from the Illinois Department of Public Health concerning HIV testing. So, a positive test means that antibodies for HIV were found in your blood. That means you have HIV. You are infected for life and can spread HIV to others. Well, if you have a positive test, you might have HIV, but you might not. We've talked about the base rate fallacy once before, some weeks ago, when we were working on the book from Ian Hacking, An Introduction to Probability Inductive Logic. So I won't belabor the point here, but when you have a test that's pretty accurate, you should think that it's pretty accurate. You shouldn't think it's 100% accurate. There's a big difference between very accurate and totally 100% accurate, zero chance of being mistaken. Another kind of illusion or error that people fall into is where they mistake uncertainty for risk. And it's this illusion that I think Gigerenzer spends much more time on in this book, and maybe even much more time on just in his career as a whole. This is where we take the mathematical tools that are useful in the middle category and we apply them to issues arising in the third category when they're very well may not be appropriate at all. Those tools may be great in a certain class of situations, but in another class of situations, they may be actually terrible. And he calls this the turkey illusion from an old anecdote, which has been attributed to various people, but is most common to Bertrand Russell. So Bertrand Russell was the most famous philosopher of the first few decades of the 20th century. He was a household name in a way that philosophy professors these days are not household names. I believe he was only one of 2 or 3 philosophers to ever receive the Nobel Prize for Literature. But in any case, he offered the following anecdote. So, consider the turkey who says, well, the farmer has fed me every day, so he will feed me again tomorrow. When in fact tomorrow is going to be Thanksgiving. So, the turkey's reasoning follows certain advice for inductive reasoning very, very well. Gigerenzer mentioned something called Laplace's rule of succession, which I think Leonard Mlodinow in his book The Drunkard's Walk also mentioned. Doesn't matter what that rule is for right now, but sort of any perspective, the sort of leading perspectives on how you should reason about inductive evidence and how you should predict the future on the basis of the past, whether it's a Bayesian perspective or whatever. The turkey has followed that reasoning perfectly. The more days that the turkey feeds him, the more days that the farmer feeds the turkey, the more certain the turkey should be that he's going to get fed on the subsequent or following day. So the rational thing is for the turkey's certainty or confidence to grow with each passing day. That's the rational thing. But when we know that Thanksgiving is coming, there's something rather comical about this. So the turkey illusion is, the turkey illusion arises because this kind of certain tools like the rule of succession and other sorts of tools that advise you how to update your beliefs, much of the time they only work when you're dealing with risks that are known from the outset. All risks are known from the outset. But there's this one risk that the turkey did not know about. It was unknown, totally unknown to the turkey, that he's going to be beheaded, skinned, stuffed, roasted at some point. That's totally unknown to him. And so because he did not and could not foresee it, he wasn't able to incorporate it into his model of reasoning about the future. So much of life is like that. There's risks out there that are unknown unknowns. We have no idea what could really happen. If that's the case, then we cannot now incorporate them into our best models of prediction. So one example of the turkey illusion that Gigerenzer gives comes from the 2008 financial crisis. Housing prices were just going up and up. Weeks before the bottom fell out, Hank Paulson, Treasury Secretary, says our financial institutions and banks are strong, our capital markets are resilient, efficient, flexible, and then the bottom fell out right afterward. We have the chief financial officer for Goldman Sachs saying, our risk models were completely taken by surprise by these exceedingly unlikely events that happened several days in a row. Now these events were described as 25 sigma events, and Gigerenzer explains to us what that means. This is just a measure of how unlikely something really is. So a 3 sigma event is an event that's, according to our model at least, is expected to happen only once every 2 years. A 5 sigma event, according to our models, is one that's we should expect to happen only once since the last ice age, which I think ended, 11,000 years ago, something like that. Now you'll notice that this is not an additive scale. You'll see that 3 sigma equals once every 2 years. You'll notice that 6 sigma would not equal once every 4 years, right? When you go from 3 to 6, you're not just you're doubling when you go from the 3 to the 6, but you're not doubling what's on the right-hand side. So it doesn't follow that kind of trajectory. Oh, there we go. I have some information about the last ice age that I forgot that I had mentioned. It ended about 12,000 years ago. So a 7 to 8 sigma event is something that you should expect, according to your model at least, to happen only once since the Big Bang, what does that mean a 25 sigma event would be? Remember when we went from 3 to 7? A 3 sigma event is supposed to occur only once every 2 years. A 7 sigma event is supposed to occur only about once since the Big Bang. That's 13.7 billion years ago. So in going from just 3 to 7, we went from 2 years to 13.7 billion years. So from going 7 sigma to 25 sigma, what are we going to? Well, Gigerenzer just says, well, it's an event, it's beyond imagination, the figure that would represent that. Now what's important to realize is the way that Gigerenzer initially describes a 3 sigma, a 5 sigma event, he makes it sound like this is a feature of the event. It's a property of some event in the natural or social world to be a 3 sigma event or a 5 sigma event. But something that I want to make sure that you understand is that's not quite the way to understand it. As I was going through each of these sigmas, I kept emphasizing according to our model should happen only once in so many years. I want to emphasize the prediction of what's a 3 sigma or a 25 sigma comes from the model. So with the financial crisis, we had 25 sigma events occurring day after day after day after day after day. If they really were 25 sigma events, they would not be occurring day after day after day after day after day after day, right? A 7 to 8 sigma event is only, if it's really a 7 to 8 sigma event, is only going to occur once in about 14 billion years. So if an event is really a 25 sigma event, you are simply not going to have it occur day after day. A unique 125 sigma event one day, a completely different 25 sigma event the next day, and a completely different one, and so on and so on. What that shows is they were never 25 sigma events to begin with. This is what I'm trying to suggest. I want to emphasize this point because Gigerenzer doesn't emphasize or highlight or explicate it quite the way that I think he should. What the financial crisis shows us is that the models were flawed. It doesn't show, the financial crisis doesn't. The lesson from the financial crisis is not the following. It's not that, well, our models were pretty good. It's just that some really unlikely things happened. We were powerless to predict an event that's as rare as a 25 sigma event, and we're even more powerless to predict multiple 25 sigma events. That's the wrong message. The message is there were so many of them, it's overwhelming evidence that they were never 25 sigma events, and your model that said they were is the wrong model. So Gigerenzer thinks that too much of the mathematics of the stock market is mathematics that it's appropriate for our middle category of risk, but is simply not appropriate for the third category of uncertainty. That's the idea. The mathematics simply doesn't apply. And thinking that it applies results in these silly things like this. Your model says 25 sigma events shouldn't happen, but they did. Okay. So there's the Turk illusion. Here's a cartoon. This doesn't appear in the book, but this illustrates what Gigerenzer thinks that financial analysts are doing and other sorts of predictors of the future. If you got this guy, this is normally characterized as a drunk guy looking for his keys or for something by a light post. So it's nighttime. In this particular variation, you can tell from the graphic it's rather old. We have this guy saying, I'm looking for my quarter that I dropped. And you see the policeman who's walking his beat saying, did you drop it? He says, no, I dropped it 2 blocks down the street. And the cop says, well, why are you looking for it here, moron? And the answer is, because the light here is better. So some incarnations of this, it's a drunk guy looking for his keys, but in either case, it's a light post. So financial analysts feel a need to do math, particular kinds of math in particular kind of regression analysis. But what if it doesn't apply? What if it only applies in one domain, but you want to know what's going to happen in some other domain? Well, if it's the only tool they got, they're just going to keep using that tool. The tool here is analogous to the light provided by the lamppost, but the real-world problem you're interested in is analogous to something over in the darkness. A striking example of the difference between situations of known risk and situations of unknown risks is provided in Chapter 7 of Gigerenzer's text, when he discusses the story behind the story of the Monty Hall problem. So I want to bring this together with material that he's discussing in Chapter 2 because of how well I think his discussion of the Monty Hall issue in Chapter 7 illustrates the distinction between these domains that he introduces in Chapter 2. So there's the Monty Hall problem that we first encountered in Leonard Mlodinow's book, and I believe Ian Hacking had something to say about it as well. I never really spent much time on it in class, or at least I mentioned it in class, but I didn't go over exactly the ins and outs of the problem very much. But I want to do that now and then talk about the difference between the Monty Hall problem as it has been discussed by philosophers, mathematicians, decision scientists, and then discuss the actual game show with the real guy Monty Hall, who you see pictured there. He's pictured there, of course, with 3 doors, behind which there are certain prizes or undesirable items. So the Monty Hall problem as it's discussed in scholarly mathematical contexts, is a situation of known risk. There's no guarantee that you'll choose, there's no way to guarantee that you're going to choose the winning prize or choose the right door, but we know exactly what the risks are. But on the actual game show with the actual guy, what's interesting is the way he plays mind games and just sort of makes things spontaneous and arbitrary such that you have no idea what the risks are. So let's talk about this. So in the Monty Hall problem, this is not the actual game show, but this is the problem as discussed in the famous Ask Marilyn column, in which then became discussed by scholars around the world. The problem goes like this. There are 3 doors on this game show, and behind one of them is a new car. Behind the other 2 doors are goats. The contestant is supposed to pick one door. But then the host opens a second door, revealing a goat. It's important that the host will never open a door to reveal a car. So it's not as if the host is just sort of is blind and just happens to open some door and it might be the new car that's the desirable prize and it might be a ghost. It's that the host opens a door that the host knows the prize is not behind. Okay. So the contestant has picked one door, but some other door has been opened, and the host asks the contestant if they want to switch to the other door that has not yet been opened. So it's not the one they picked, it's not the one that has been opened by the host, it is some third door. So here's the common sense answer. The thought, which is wrong, the thought is, well, car's not behind the open door, so there's a 50-50 chance of it being behind, one of the other two doors. So switching shouldn't change anything. You should be indifferent to staying where you are or switching to the other door. So it turns out that's not correct. Something like this kind of thinking, I think, might work well. A key reason why this thinking doesn't work is because the host intentionally opens a particular door. And let's explain the right way. So here's the explanation that Gigerenzer gives. It's a little different than the one that Mlodinow gives. And some people give more complicated and simpler explanations than others, but Gigerenzer's is the simplest one I've seen. It's simpler than Mlodinow's. So instead of just thinking of one contestant at a time, consider 3 contestants, each of whom picks a different door. So contestant 1 picks door 1, contestant 2 picks door 2, contestant 3 picks door 3. So 3 contestants who pick 3 different doors. Now let's suppose that the shiny new car is behind door 2. By the way, this line of reasoning will go through exactly the same way, regardless of whether we say, suppose the new car is behind door 2 or we pick some other door. It won't matter. It will turn out the same. The thing is, we have 3 different people picking 3 different doors. Okay, now let's imagine, let's consider these contestants one by one. And their options of staying with their original pick or switching. So with contestant 1, who has chosen door 1, where the car is not, if they stay with their original choice, well, they'll lose. If they switch, though, they will win. Let's think about why switching is guaranteed to win. The contestant picks door 1. The host opens one of the other doors, but the host is not going to open the door where the car actually is. They're going to open the only other available door, which is where a goat is. That means in this particular situation, a switch is guaranteed to win. Now, of course, contestant 1 doesn't know that they're guaranteed to win, but let's go through the other cases. Now, contestant 2 has chosen door 2. Now, that's where the car actually is. So if they stay, they win. If they switch to the other unopened door, they lose. Now, contestant 3 chooses door 3. That's not where the car is. The car's behind door 2, not door 3. So if they stay with door 3, they will lose. But if they've chosen door 3, and the host has opened one of the other 2 doors, again, they're not going to open the door with the car. They're going to open the other door with the goat, which means if they switch to the unopened door, the door that's unopened and unpicked, they'll win. So let's look at this over here. There's 3 possibilities. Switching wins 2 out of 3 of those times. And you can run the same thing, you can run this line of thinking all the way through with supposing the car is behind door 1. And you'll see again, switching wins 2 out of 3 times. And then you can, again, do it with door 3. Okay, so switching is the right way to go. Switching, contrary to what common sense might initially tell you, is not something that gives you a 50% chance of winning. It gives you a 2/3 chance of winning. So that's the right way to think about it. Now an important feature of the Monty Hall problem is this. In the Ask Marilyn column, which made the Monty Hall problem famous, it depends upon the situation being very regular. And in particular, the question as it was posed to her in one of her letters, these people write in with letters and she answers their letters that pose some puzzle. So in the question and in her answer, she is assuming that the host always offers the contestant the opportunity to switch and always opens a door where there's a goat. That's not how things were in reality. The Real Monty Hall was apparently a piece of work. I've never actually seen an episode of The Real Guy on The Real Show, but I'm sure old episodes are available on YouTube. So he liked to really mix things up and do things in an unscripted fashion. I mean, there was a general script about how things should go, but he was given a lot of discretion in ways that I suppose I've never seen another game show host operate, I don't think. So an important part of the show was this guy in particular, his personality and his mind games and his trickiness. So here's Gigerenzer on page 129 of our text. The real game show revolved around the persona of Monty Hall. He liked to make spontaneous decisions. Suspense of the game arose from contestants' uncertainty about what this guy was doing. Monty Hall himself says, "Where does it say that I have to let you switch every time? I'm the master of the show." If the host is required to open a door all the time, and he offers you a switch, yeah, you should take the switch. You'll win 2 out of 3 times. But if he has the choice about whether to allow a switch or not, beware. Caveat emptor. That means let the buyer beware. It all depends on his mood. Okay, so in other words, the real game show is not like the problem. So here's a little transcript from an actual episode. This appears in Gigerenzer's text, but it's worth reproducing and discussing here because it's a perfect illustration. It provides us with a perfect illustration of how the real life Monty Hall on the game show Let's Make a Deal put contestants in a situation of uncertainty, a situation of totally unknown risks, not a situation of known risk where you can just do the math. You can be this, you just consult your local brainy mathematician and you figure out, oh, 2/3 chance of winning if I switch, 1/3 chance of winning if I stay. It's not like that. You have no idea what calculations to make. So in the actual episode that we have here, contestant picked door 1, Monty Hall opened door 3, which of course revealed a goat, and he said, "Here, I'm offering you $3,000 if you don't switch." You can switch and see what's behind that door, and if you switch, you won't get the $3,000. You'll get whatever is behind that door. It might be a goat. By the way, can't you sell a goat on Craigslist or something? I mean, it's not like they're totally worthless, but anyway. But this contestant says, "I'll switch. $3,000, cash money. Could be a car, could be a goat. How about $4,000? The contestant says, "I'll try the door." Monty Hall ups his offer, $4,500, $47,000, $48,000, $5,000 if you don't switch. Let's open the door. You just ended up with a goat. So he opens the door. The contestant doesn't win the car because it's not there behind that door. And they don't win the $5,000. So as you can see from the let's make a deal part is that in addition to whatever's going on with the doors, it's not just choose a door and maybe you win, maybe you don't, and maybe you choose and then switch doors, but there's this other sort of thing. There's this sort of bet out, it's on the side almost, or or it's on top of the basic level of action. So I understand the Let's Make a Deal show has had a more recent incarnation, but I haven't seen episodes of that either. But I don't know how much of this unscriptedness is part of the new episode. But Monty Hall has some things to say about why he did. He said to the contestant right after, this is to the contestant to whom he had offered $5,000. You see what happened? The higher I got with my offers, the more you thought the car was behind the door that you wanted to switch to. You thought I didn't want you to switch. I wanted to con you into switching. I knew the car was behind door 1. That's the kind of thing I can do when I'm in control of the game. So what is the real Monty Hall going to do? Well, you don't know. The real Monty Hall might, some of the time, try to tempt you away from the winning car with cash. Sometimes he might not. I mean, some of the times It's only some of the time that he's going to allow you this option to switch at all. And then regardless of whether he's offering you the switch option, he may or may not also be offering you a bet on top of things. And he might offer that bet in different ways. He might really be trying to lure you away with cash, away from the car some of the time. Or who knows what he's doing. So the suggestion is, the reason why I wanted to put this example from Chapter 7 together with this chart that you see on the screen here from Chapter 2 is, I think it's a fantastic illustration of the difference between categories 2 and 3. The academic Monty Hall problem fits in the middle category. Risks are known, we can do the math, we can determine switching wins 2 out of 3 times. Not switching wins 1 out of 3 times, so switching is better than not switching. But with this real guy who seems a little bit eccentric and to be given a longer leash than most any other game show host, more freedom to call audibles, you don't know what he's going to do. So it's a situation on the right of uncertainty, and you can't write a letter to the author of the Ask Marilyn column and have a brainy mathematician sort of spell out for you exactly what are the odds of winning and losing. It simply doesn't work in this case. You need to do something else. So Gigerenzer thinks that smart rules of thumb are the thing you need to rely upon. And he goes about the business of testing a variety of rules of thumb and testing them against complex algorithms and trying to show in which situations the smart but very simple rules of thumb, which anybody can employ, outperform the very complicated algorithms, which not everybody can employ by any means. So on our last class meeting of the semester, which will occur the Thursday after Thanksgiving during the last week of class, we'll talk more about some of these rules. For now, I think I'll just mention one rule, the minimax rule, which both Gigerenzer and the actual Monty Hall think you should employ if you were on the game show choosing doors and the host offers you $3,000 if you don't switch. You should take the money. So the minimax rule says, choose the alternative that avoids the worst. So the mini is minimize, and the max in the minimax name is something big. So you're trying to minimize something big. Of course, you're not going to want to minimize something big if that something is good. This is minimizing the biggest bad thing, the biggest loss. So you look at the worst case scenarios of switching and not switching, and you ask yourself which is the least worst, and you go with that. So in the situation where you've picked one door, Monty Hall has opened another door, revealing a goat, and he's given you the option to switch to the third door, and he's offered you $3,000 not to switch. Let's consider the worst case scenario. Suppose you do switch, and the car is not behind the door you switch to. That means you don't get any money, and you don't get a car. So the worst case version of switching is you get nothing except a goat, which again, you could sell on Craigslist, but anyway, is basically worthless. Certainly not several $1,000s worth. But what's the worst case scenario if you take Monty Hall's money? He's offering you $3,000 not to switch. And you say, okay. Well, if you don't switch, then you get $3,000. And presumably he's going to go ahead and open the door, and maybe you win a car on top of the $3,000, and maybe you don't. But either way, worst case scenario, you've got $3,000 you didn't have before. Whereas if you switch to the new door, you might win the car, but you might win nothing and have to forego the money as well. So the worst case version of switching is no money, no car. The worst case version of staying and not switching is getting $3,000, but maybe no car. So both Monty Hall and Gigerenzer think it would be more rational to do the minimax, to follow the minimax rule here, than to try to switch. In any case, we'll talk more about rules of thumb that you might apply and reasons for and against some of them. But the main idea, the main point that I wanted to get across by going through the story behind the Monty Hall problem, which is sort of never represented anywhere except for here in Gigerenzer's text. I mean, whenever someone talks about the Monty Hall problem, it's always the clean version with a very nice, elegant mathematical solution. People don't talk about the real-world version. And Gigerenzer's main point is that the real world is full of so many unknowns and unknown unknowns, and that you can't do the math. And so to think you can do the math is a big mistake. So there's two parts to Gigerenzer's overall perspective. If you're in category 3 on the right in a situation of uncertainty, the first thing to realize is you can't do the math. And that's a lesson unto itself. You can't do the math that characterizes category number 2, known risks. Now then, the second part to Gigerenzer's story is this simple heuristics that make us smart bit, which we need to talk about more, but we will talk about after Thanksgiving. So even if you don't understand why some of these simple rules might be better or might be preferable to just flipping a coin or what, if you're not sure what they have going for them, the first lesson that we need to get across is the math of category 2 doesn't apply to category 3. Now, before going on back to through some of the things that Gigerenzer has to say, I want to contrast the zero risk illusion and the turkey illusion that Gigerenzer talks about with two other kinds of illusions that Daniel Kahneman talks about. So these are not represented in your reading, but I found it very interesting the way that these two thinkers, when they're thinking about common mistakes we make, not only, as we've said, is Kahneman much more pessimistic and negative than the more optimistic, positive Gigerenzer, but it's very interesting here that they take the more, they think that the errors we make in some of these domains aren't, the most common errors we make aren't even the same errors. So let me show you what I have in mind here. I think we can learn from both of these thinkers, by the way. It's interesting to have both. So suppose that you have certain chances of winning some lottery, and suppose that you hear an initial estimate. It's an accurate estimate, by the way. For whatever reason, you can just play along and assume that you can be very confident. You can be very certain that the estimate is correct. But suppose that after the initial estimate of your chance of winning is given to you, it's revised. First, you're told you are in possession of a lottery ticket and it has a 0% chance of winning. But then that's revised. Oh, by the way, just kidding, or whatever, it's not a 0%, it's a 5% chance. I don't know. That seems to be a significant difference. Now compare that to a situation where initially you think and are told that you have a lottery ticket that has a 5% chance of winning, but then the next bit of information you're given is, oh, just kidding, you actually have a 10% chance of winning. Now think about these two cases where you go from a 0% to a 5% chance of winning, and the second situation where you go from a 5% chance to a 10% chance of winning. Now in both cases there's a 5% difference that you experience. But hopefully you can sense that the two situations are very different. Going from a 5% to a 10% chance of winning is nice, but it doesn't seem as nice or as big or as great news as going from 0% to 5%. You had no chance of winning. Now you have some. Okay. Now think about things on the other end of the scale. On the sort of above 50% end of the scale. So initially you have a lottery ticket that you know and are told has a 60% chance of winning, and then for whatever reason that estimate is revised to 65%. Okay, nice. With a 60% chance of winning, you are more likely to win than you were to lose. That's nice. And now you're even more likely to win. So that's even nicer. But when you go from 95 to 100% chance of winning, even though you're still just going up by a 5% increment, and even though, like the 60 to 65% scenario, you're still on the end of the spectrum that's above the 50% mark, going from 95 to 100 feels bigger and more significant than going from 60 to 65. At least to most people, and hopefully you have a sense of that too. So, Kahneman, in some of his research, suggests that while there is something right about how it should feel to go from no chance of winning to some chance of winning, and how it should feel to go from 95 to total guarantee of winning, there's kind of something right about that. But Kahneman wants, well, remember he's the negative guy, he wants to focus on a kind of mistake we make. One mistake is on the lower end of the scale, where when highly unlikely outcomes are treated as more likely than they really are. And on the other end of the spectrum, an effect he calls the certainty effect, where nearly certain outcomes are treated as less certain than they really are. So, here's a line representing 0% chance and 100% chance. And here's two marks showing roughly where 2% and 98% would be. So Kahneman has discovered in his research that across a huge variety of cases and contexts and people treat a 2% chance of something as being like an 8% chance. And they treat a 98% chance of something occurring as an 87% chance. So their perceptions and thinkings about chances is skewed towards the middle. You see how the red represents reality, the green represents what's in their own mind. And of course it's on this end that the possibility effect that you saw defined in the last slide occurs, and over here where the certainty effect occurs. So consider the following scenario. We're going to focus at first on just the left end, the lower end of the scale. Here's how the possibility effect shows itself in real life. When someone has a 2% chance of surviving cancer, 2% chance of avoiding a bad thing, they're more hopeful than is really warranted by the evidence. They're sort of cheery, like they've got more like an 8%. You know, that's almost 1 out of 10 chance of surviving. Or if it's a 2% chance of winning a prize, they're again more hopeful. Oh, I might actually win this. So first of all, with the 2% chance, you might actually win. But when you look at people's behavior and sort of measure their behavior by the decisions and choices that they make, it works out that they're more hopeful than is warranted. Now consider another kind of case. So initially, when you're talking about the 2% chance of surviving cancer or winning a prize, those are both good things, right? Surviving, good. Winning, good. Okay, how about a 2% of something bad? 2% chance of dying, say from cancer or whatever. Or a 2% chance of failing. Failing to win, failing at something. Well, again, Kahneman's suggestion from his research is that people, again, treat the 2% more like an 8. They treat it as being a larger percent than it really is, skewed towards the middle. So they're actually more fearful. If you have a 2% chance of dying, they treat it like they've got more of a chance of dying than that, or more significant chance of failing. So let's do the same thing now with the other end of the spectrum, where there's a 98% chance of something, but people treat it as much lower. And again, let's look at our cases of something good, surviving the cancer, winning the prize. So if you have a 98% chance of surviving cancer, people are more fearful than they should be. Remember the case of surviving cancer a minute ago was you had a 2% chance of surviving cancer, and people treated it more like 8. So they were more when they were dealing with the other end of the scale, other end of the spectrum, they were more hopeful than was warranted. Now they're more fearful. You tell someone they've got a 99% chance of surviving cancer. They're thinking about that 1 or 2% chance of dying, and they're more fearful of that. So similarly with something good. Similarly something bad. So initially we consider the 98% chance of something good, like surviving or winning. Now we're considering a 98% chance of something bad, dying or failing. You tell someone you've got a 98% chance of dying, and they think, oh, I've got an 8% chance of living. No, you've got a 98% chance of dying. That means there's not much of a chance that you're not going to. But again, people are more hopeful. Okay. So in case you're curious, this is the scale that Daniel Kahneman has worked out. This is taken from his book from 2012 called Thinking Fast and Slow. When there's a probability of 1%, people treat it as 5.5% in their decision. When there's a probability of something being 10% chance, they treat it more like 18.5%, and so on. So skewed towards the middle. Their decision weights. That's the sort of probability, or how they treat the probability in their mind, decision, actions, behavior. Now the reason why I wanted to mention this is because the possibility effect and the certainty effect are an opposite kind of error from the zero risk illusion that Gigerenzer talks about. So Gigerenzer talks about how 2% chances are treated as 0% and how 98% chances are treated as 100%. Because we know that the risk is 2 or 98, we treat ourselves as being a bit more in control, as if it was 0 versus 100. And that's not the case, it's 2 and 98. So Gigerenzer talks a good bit about the zero risk illusion, where we treat where we depart one way from reality. So look at our 2 red bars there on the number line. The 2 red bars are reality, and the 2 green bars are our perceptions. And in this particular situation, the green bars are skewed towards the extremes, and that's the zero risk illusion that Gigerenzer talks about, where the red bars are near the extremes, and then we go ahead and skew them some more all the way out to the end of the extreme, the most extreme point. So Kahneman considers them, and these are Kahneman's words that you see here in blue on the slide, where he says, well, this is an error that's less common than the possibility and certainty effect, but is equally wrong. Gigerenzer doesn't mention the possibility and certainty effects at all, Okay, so for Kahneman, the main error is taking our red bars and skewing them towards the middle in our minds. Gigerenzer focuses on those cases where we skew them away from the middle, towards the extremes. So not only do they differ in looking at cups that are half full of water, where Kahneman says, well, the cup's half empty, and Gigerenzer says it's half full, one being more optimistic, one being more pessimistic about human cognition, human cognitive abilities. They see errors in thinking about probabilities as just occurring in different kinds of groups and families and directions. It's helpful to have both researchers out there showing how we fall into both mistakes so that we can just be aware, don't fall into one error or the other. So it's good advice. I want to move on a little bit now to talk about some things that are in Chapter 5 of Gigerenzer's book, Risk Savvy. And the particular things that I want to focus on here concern overconfidence in particular and experts. Sometimes it's just our own overconfidence. Gigerenzer, like Kahneman, focuses on the overconfidence of experts. Maybe they have some agreement in thinking that experts can be way too confident when they don't have a reason for doing so. So let me introduce some ideas about overconfidence. I want to introduce to you the Lake Wobegon effect first. This is named after the fictional place Lake Wobegon, made famous by Garrison Keillor on his radio program Prairie Home Companion, which old people listen to on NPR on Saturday evenings. So it's this fictional town out on the prairie, upper Midwest, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. So some psychologists have taken the idea of everyone being above average and label it an effect after this town. So it turns out that we all tend to think we're more intelligent, more fair-minded, less prejudiced, skillful, beautiful, charming, popular, more likely to go to heaven even, than the average person. So before we get to the overconfidence of experts, we just need to realize that every person, maybe not every last, as we'll see, it's not every last person, but for the most part, the majority of humans fall prey to the Lake Wobegon. So in one study, 1 million high school seniors were given various self-assessments. 70% rated themselves as above average in leadership. 100% rated themselves as above average in their ability to get along with other people. 60% rated themselves as being in the top 10 of being able to get along with. Students across the board overestimate their scores on exams. Newlyweds drastically overestimate their marriage prospects. Almost every newlywed thinks their marriage is going to last a long time. And you last a lifetime. You present them divorce statistics and they say, oh, yeah, I know about that. Yeah, but that's other people. So we have this Lake Wobegon effect. We think we're better than average. Most everybody thinks they're above average. That's not possible. And then when you try to give people statistics to get them out of this, they fail to appreciate the statistics. They think of the statistics as applying to everybody else out there, but they're special. Vast majority of smokers think they're less at risk of developing lung cancer, heart disease, emphysema than other smokers. That's just silly. There's a little comic from XKCD. Look at these people. Everyone is thinking to themselves privately and quietly on a let's say it's a New York City subway train. Because there's a lot of cocky people in New York City. Glassy-eyed automatons going about their daily lives. never stopping to look around them and think, I'm the only reflective, conscious, deep thinker. I'm special. I'm a snowflake. Okay. Too many. Okay. We tend to think of ourselves as being very special exceptions. This is called hubris. So, there's certain risks that come with overconfidence. Increased risk-taking. Part of being overconfident is to treat the risk as being smaller than it really is. Decreased preventive care. Less likely to take precautions. Sometimes overconfident people can actually hit upon success. But one of the biggest benefits for overconfidence is this. You avoid what psychologists call depressive realism. If you have a realistic conception of your physical attractiveness, your popularity among your peers, your intelligence as compared to others, this is correlated with being depressed. So, people say, there's that old saying, ignorance is bliss. I don't think ignorance really is bliss. But there are respects in which being ignorant of your own limitations is, useful to you. It's inaccurate still. It's not accurate, but, it can help. Now, a lot of experts are overconfident, and we've seen this guy before, Dr. Doom, Nouriel Roubini. We discussed him very early in the semester when we were just talking about some general properties of probabilities. And we were discussing the idea that, well, even if there's a small chance of something happening, if you have enough chances of getting that thing right, well, then you multiply all the chances you had of getting that thing right by the small probability of getting it right any particular time, and what you come up with is, maybe that it's expected that you will get things right. So that's the context that we talked about this guy, because he made lots of predictions over and over again. But I want to bring him up again just to talk about something slightly different. I mean, it's related, but not just to make a point about probabilities and if you have lots of chances to get things right, then you're going to get you may very well get things right, even though the chances of getting things wrong on any single time is small. But let me just remind you about him so we can transition to Gigerenzer's larger discussion of experts and some of their overconfidence. So, before the financial crisis of 2008 happened, he announced that it was brewing. He was greeted with skepticism, but then he was soon vindicated. Well, it turns out that he was one of many people making lots of predictions, and we talked about how it's unlikely that somebody should make a correct prediction. He, as we saw, was a perma-bear. Year after year said, bad things are coming. Hey, what's going to happen next year? Doom. Hey, how about the next year? Doom. How about after that? Doom. Gigerenzer talks about this point a little bit. He mentioned someone who predicted a stock market collapse that happened in 1987, just 4 days before it occurred, and was hailed as the guru of Black Monday. Her later predictions turned out to be less correct than if you had based predictions off of a simple coin. Here's a similar point to something we've seen before. You have 10,000 investment managers making some binary prediction. In other words, the prediction has only one of two outcomes. Something is going up, or something is going down, something like that. Only two options. They don't have three options to choose from, or four or five, or a continuum of choices. If you're just given a binary set of options, If they were just choosing by chance, 5,000 would be correct. And take the 5,000 that are correct and let them just by chance make a similar binary prediction for the next year. Well, just by guessing, you're going to get a chunk correct again and again. So take the 2,500 who were correct one year and let them flip a coin to make a prediction for the next year. We keep this up for 10 years. You're still going to have a handful of investment advisors who, after 10 years, will get things right 10 years in a row, even if all they've been doing all this time is just flipping a coin or something equivalent to flipping a coin. So there are some illusions of skill that affect a variety of people's habits, judgments, and decisions. But here's some that concern experts in particular. Daniel Kahneman, from his book Thinking Fast and Slow, suggests that many individuals lose consistently by trading, by active trading in particular. He says this is an achievement that a dart-throwing chimp, sort of picking stocks, picking what to do with stocks, sort of on the basis of whether the chimp happened to hit the bullseye or not, wouldn't be able to match. So we analyzed 163,000 stock trades. Most of the time, stocks that were sold did substantially better than stocks that were bought during the following year. I think I might have mentioned this slide once before. You sell a stock when you think its value is not going to increase in price. Those that were sold actually increased in price more than those that you bought. You're going to buy some because you think they're going to increase in price. Doing nothing would have been better. So as a side note, the most active traders did worse. Here are titles of 2 scholarly articles analyzing trades and the consequences of those trades. One thing is that the more active a trader you are, more hazard it is to your wealth, and that men tend to be more active in trading and more damaging to their portfolios because of this. So when Daniel Kahneman was invited to lecture to a group of investment advisors, he asked ahead of time if he could have the data of those very advisors about their decisions and their investments over a certain period of time. So he wasn't just asking for, he didn't just want to talk about data of some advisors. He wanted to talk about the data from the advisors he was going to talk about in this particular company. And what he found was there was zero correlation in the year-to-year successes of these people. Let me explain what he's looking for here. He's looking to see, okay, out of the people, the investment advisors who did the best during the year 2004, how well did they do in 2005? If someone was the top investment advisor, 2004, how likely are they to be in the top, one of the top, in the following year? Or if someone is one of the worst in 2004, how likely are they to be one of the worst again in the following year? So that's the year-to-year correlation he's looking for. There was none. In other words, the person who's one of the best in one year, there's no reason to expect them to be above average in the following year, even slightly above average. So even a weak correlation would suggest if someone is one of the very best, maybe you can't expect them to be one of the very best the next year, but you can at least expect them to be a little bit above average. That's what you would get if there's a small correlation, but there was zero. In other words, the person who's the best this year is as likely to be the worst next year as they are as the person who was worse last year is to be worst the next year. But of course, firms each year reward bonuses to those who are the best this year. So Kahneman analyzed all this data, presented this to this firm of advisors whose performance he had analyzed. On the way back to the airport, someone was giving him a ride, and it was a rather chilly ride, and I'm not talking about the weather either. I'm talking about the social situation. One advisor said, "I've done very well for the firm. No one can take that away from me." Well, I got news for you. He just did take it away from you with numbers. Now, okay, so we've talked a little bit in this class about how there's overconfidence with some kinds of experts, and maybe that experts in certain domains don't have the expertise that we might have thought they did, but we haven't yet given a reason as to why. And Gigerenzer gives part of the story. And I want to finish this presentation by telling you this part of the story. The rest of the story, how simple rules of thumb will outperform complex multiple regression analyses, that's going to have to wait till our last class meeting the last Thursday after Thanksgiving. But here's just one piece of the puzzle. This figure is figure 5.1 from Gigerenzer's book. It appears on page 87. It represents exchange rates between the US dollar and the euro, both predicted exchange rates and actual exchange rates. So you'll see along the x-axis we have the exchange rates for the month of December in the years that are considered. So not every month of the year appears, just the end of the year. And this is presumably an average in that throughout that month, I suppose. What we see with the squares or boxes are the actual exchange rates in those months. Each black dot is the prediction of some individual bank, looking at a set of some of the largest banks: Credit Suisse, Royal Bank of Canada, UBS, Deutsche Bank, and so on. The circle, I guess what do you call it, unfilled circle, empty circle, represents the average prediction of these banks. So the dark solid line represents the trend of the actual exchange rate, and the sort of more faintly colored dotted line represents the trend line of predictions. So what we see is that there is a mismatch that occurs, and it occurs in a very regular and systematic pattern, actually. So look at this year right here, or this difference between 2 years, I suppose, 2 Decembers. We have December 2004 and December 2005. Predictions are, it's going to go up. What happened? Not so much. Okay, let's try again. Next year, from December 2005 to 2006, let's predict it's going to go down. I guess it went up. What we have here is, as Gigerenzer, we have analysts predicting that each subsequent year is going to be just like the year before, because of the particular models they're using. But this leads them to be consistently 1 year behind and missing every upswing and missing every downswing. So let's look again at the chart, but instead of looking at areas where a minute ago I was looking at both predicted and actual exchange rates for the same time period. Now let's look at actual rates 1 year before predicted rates, and we see this nice little pattern. What do we predict, highlighted in red? Well, we predict the same upward slope from the year before. It's about the same slope. What do we do when the slope goes down for the year before? We're finding ourselves in 2005, December 2005, after the exchange rate has gone down from December of 2004 to December of 2005. What do we predict now going forward? We predict a downward slope. It's almost the same slope, though. That's a prediction that's, by the way, not as extreme, which, as if you remember what regression to the mean is, that's actually, if you're gonna do this, you should be less extreme in your predictions than the year before. But in any case, what we see them as sort of tagging along behind. What I wanted to mention about this is just, it's a unique feature of regression analysis that it fits existing data points. I mean, that's what regression is. We give you a bunch of data points, and you draw them. You make the best prediction, you draw the best trend line. Maybe it's a straight line, maybe it's a curve, maybe it's a parabola, maybe it's a more complicated curve of some point. But whether you draw a parabola through the lines, curve something or other, or a straight line through the data points, in every case you're trying to fit the existing data. So with this chart, what we see is we see the weaknesses of a model whose strength and only strength is fitting. Nothing wrong with fitting data if your goal is to construct a model that fits the data in front of you. If that's what you want to do, regression is cool. It's great. We want to fit the data. Okay, fine, fit it. Okay. But fitting what we have, if we're in the third domain of uncertainty, not the second domain, the domain of known risk, their fitting isn't going to be much good. We're going to fit with what we've already seen. But with these predictions of exchange rates between the dollar and the euro, every time the exchange rate goes down, will we adjust our regression so that our regression points downward? It fits. Every time we have observed things go up, will we adjust our model so that, our things are looking up in our model? Okay. Fitting is great for looking backwards. And so Gigerenzer wants to claim that if our goal is to look back and explain, models that focus on fitting data are exactly what we need. We're engaged in hindsight thinking, not prediction, which is looking forward. We're looking back. Something has happened. Maybe it's a large something. Maybe it's a large set of somethings. It's a big, complicated set of somethings, and it's hard to sort through. Regression analysis is a great way to sort of sort through lots and lots of factors and sort of look for what was responsible for what factors were most predictive of what actually happened. And anyway, you do that by predictive here is not future prediction, is just predicting y values from x values. If what I wanted to do is take an existing set and try to figure out what is going on in the set, this is great. But it's a feature of a lot of human life that models that focus on fitting aren't going to work because there's too many unknowns, and the models are going to overfit and be too constrained by the past, too constrained by the recent past, so that when there's something coming on the horizon which didn't figure into the past, our models are going to be incapable of seeing it. So think about the turkey illusion. The turkey following the regression model will get more and more. I think this is, following standard models anyway of belief confidence, the turkey gets more and more confident. But there's this event, the confident that it's going to continue to get fed by the farmer each new day. but there's an event coming on the horizon which it couldn't foresee, and so the model, you just need to recognize that any model that's focused only on fitting past feedings from the farmer is going to be incapable of having anything to say about the future beheading of the turkey. So that's the main idea, main illustration of the failure of fitting. Fitting works great for looking back but not looking forward, Gigerenzer says. As I said, we're going to talk in our last class period, the very last week of class, on what sort of strategies might work better for prediction.